Welcome everybody to Wildlife and Water Friendly Gardens, now in its fourth year. My name's Michelle Scholl, so I'm the one who's been sending emails out to those of you that were maybe having trouble this morning. I'm an instructor here and coordinate the program for the Environmental Learning Center, and we're on the campus of Clackamas Community College here near Oregon City. So we're glad you could join us, and I don't want to talk too long, but one thing I would like to do is thank our sponsors, especially to our financial sponsor, our funder, who is Water Environment Services in Clackamas. The sponsors that I would also like to thank are Clackamas River Basin Council, of whom we have a representative today to help with our introduction. Clackamas River Water Providers are also on board. Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District, Greater Oregon City Watersheds Council, North Clackamas Watersheds Council, and of course, Oak Lodge Water Services. So with that, I will turn things over to Alexis, who I will say formerly of North Clackamas Watersheds Council. I think not.
I still am.
She can explain. Anyhow, welcome everyone and do participate. I will now turn over to Alexis. Thanks very much. Enjoy the series.
Wonderful. Thanks and welcome everybody. You've heard us say already a couple times that we were trying to get a couple last people on mute. And that can also help with your connection speed. So hopefully that works well for folks. We're going to work on getting your speaker videos pinned. I can see Michelle is working on that right now. So before I introduce our speakers, I just wanted to let you guys know that you can post any questions in chat as we move through the workshop today. And I will be collecting those throughout the presentation. And then as we wrap up at the end too, and you send more questions through, I'll be moderating our Q&A session and making sure that your questions reach our presenters today. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Amy Barton we're not related, but we share our initials and last name. Amy is the Communications and Stewardship Program Manager for the Clackamas River Basin Council. She has a master's in nonprofit administration from Louisiana State University and a Bachelor of Science in Biology from the University of Oregon. So Amy has 10 years of experience in nonprofit development and community engagement and has dedicated her career to protecting natural resources. After spending 7 years working to preserve and restore forested wetlands in Texas and Louisiana, Amy now connects with the community to promote stewardship of the Clackamas River watershed, which I believe is the watershed many of us are tuning in from today. And then we also have Lori Hennings. Lori is a senior natural resource scientist at Metro's Parks and Nature Department. She received a master's in wildlife science from Oregon State University and a BSc from Portland State University. And for the past 23 years, Lori has helped plan and care for the over 17,000 acres of natural areas that Metro tends on behalf of the public. Lori is currently working on habitat connectivity, today's topic, as well as Oregon white oak conservation, recreation ecology, and climate change adaptation. So you might see me in chat also popping in some helpful links during their presentations today. And again, collecting those questions that come through for Q&A. But with no further ado, I think we can go ahead then and get screen share set up, and Amy can start us off and then turn it over to Lori. Thanks, everybody.
All right, well, Lori shares her screen. I'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. It's really great to be with you today. Thank you to Alexis and Michelle and the whole CCC team for including me in this really fun series. My name is Amy Barton, and I'm the Communication and Stewardship Program Manager at the Clackamas River Basin Council. And our mission is to foster partnerships for clean water and to improve fish and wildlife habitat in the Clackamas watershed. I'm very excited to kick off this conversation about the importance of wildlife corridors. I know Lori will be discussing watershed health in her presentation, so I wanted to get us started by talking about what a watershed is and share some current impacts to our urban waterways. So a watershed is a land area where all water, rain, and snowmelt drain into a specific body of water, like a river or a lake or an ocean. And that water can travel through the soil or underground, through creeks and streams before making it to that larger body of water where all the water drains together. So our organization, the Clackamas River Basin Council, focuses on the Clackamas watershed, which includes all of the land from ridgetop to ridgetop where that rainwater falls and drains into the river or its tributaries. So everyone on Earth lives in a watershed. So even in hot, dry places, water is still shed, and even if it travels, underground or through an aquifer. So in case you're wondering which watershed you live in, or maybe are tuning in from, there is a handy online tool offered by the EPA's website. It's called How's My Waterway? And it will tell you what watershed you're in and its health, depending on a variety of impairment.
You weren't on. They're saying, hi, everyone. They're talking like they've been on.
Sorry, I think I got muted in that process too. Okay, moving on. Okay, so I think that Alexis might be able to drop that link for you in the chat to How's My Waterway. Awesome, thank you, Alexis. And you can use that tool to figure out what watershed you are in and the health of that watershed. So you may find when or if you use this tool that the watershed that you live in is named after your local creek or river, but you can break down watersheds even further or scale them up to see how your watershed fits into the larger picture. So for instance, you can think of your roof as its own tiny watershed, where all the rain that falls onto it drains to one downspout. So that would be an example of a tiny watershed. And using a local example, like Clackamas Community College, for example, it's in the Beaver Creek subwatershed. So rain falling on the roof of one of its buildings would drain to Beaver Creek. And then that stream would drain to the Willamette River, which drains to the Columbia River, which goes all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So anything that occurs on Clackamas Community College campus has these far-reaching impacts, as far away as the ocean, because of that connection through our water. And this is the case for our homes as well. So our land use practices and our choices, such as any of the pesticides we use, de-icers, we probably used some of those last week, fertilizers, pressure washing, and the plants that we select, they all have downstream effects on the people and the wildlife that depend on that water. So we're all connected through these watersheds. Our organization conducts water quality sampling on 5 creeks in the Clackamas watershed. And the lab analysis that comes from that frequently finds that those samples we collect test above the benchmark for what's considered safe for aquatic life. So some of these products that we were finding are just common household products that any of us can buy at the store. In fact, this summer, we had an exceedance of imidacloprid, which is an insecticide in one of our watersheds creeks. That was over 4 times the most stringent aquatic life benchmark. So locally, the Clackamas River is a drinking water source for over 300,000 Oregonians. Many of those folks who receive that water don't live within the watershed, but they are impacted by the land use choices that are occurring in the Clackamas watershed nonetheless. So in addition to drinking water, we know that we, as humans, depend on healthy urban watersheds for a wide array of benefits like recreation, local climate regulation, cultural experiences. But when our urban watersheds are impaired, it decreases the value of those benefits. So I do also want to point out that the loss or decrease in these benefits does frequently occur inequitably, right? So with more vulnerable communities, most likely to experience that worst environmental degradation and the least investment in protection of that watershed. So while humans are certainly impacted by the quality of our urban watersheds, so too are our wildlife, of course. So the Clackamas River is home to threatened and endangered salmon and steelhead, and these species are highly sensitive to increased water temperature, pollution, and turbidity, and many other wildlife, such as freshwater mussels, amphibians, river otters, birds, all suffer from any human impacts in urbanized watersheds as well. So what I'm getting at is that you can help protect your community, your wildlife, and your water quality through the choices that you're making, your mini watershed at home in your yard. And there's lots of hope. So it does seem as though these days there is an emerging culture around river health and people are championing cleaner water. We do a large volunteer river cleanup event on the Clackamas River every September, and there is less and less trash found every year, from 4 tons in 2006 to just 1 ton this year. So all of you, just keep up the good work and please encourage others to do the same. I know you'll hear a lot more about this from Lori, so I will go ahead and turn it over to her. But thank you so much for letting me chat with you today, and I'll stick around to answer any questions.
Hey, can everybody hear me? And can you see my mouse? Thumbs up?
Yes.
Good, thank you. All right, today we're going to have, hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm really glad to have some folks here because this topic is near and dear to my heart, wildlife corridors and habitat connectivity. So that's what we're talking about today. As soon as I can advance my slide, there we go. My mouse is a little hinky today. Okay, so who is Metro? I work for Metro. Metro is your regional government. We were established in the 1970s, or a predecessor was, when Tom McCall was the governor and Republicans and Democrats worked across the aisles to protect farm and forest land. And that established some among other things, some fish and wildlife habitat protection. And that's what we deal with at Metro. But Metro actually has some regulatory authority. It's the only elected regional government in the country that has regulatory authority. We had the first urban growth boundary in the country right here. And right now it encompasses, excuse me, the 24 cities and the urban portions of the 3 counties here in the region. I'm sorry, I'm recovering from a cold. Most of our funds at Metro come actually from garbage hauler tipping fees. So we have a couple of solid waste for transfer stations. Your garbage hauler takes your garbage out to there, tips it, and bigger trucks take it out to the landfill. And but Parks and Nature is actually funded more from bond measures and from levies. We'll talk about in a sec. We're not TriMet. Lots of people think we are, but we're not. Actually, when I came to work at Metro, I kind of thought Metro was TriMet too at the very beginning. We do a lot of transportation. We hand out the big federal transportation dollars. Everybody comes to the table. That's what a metropolitan planning organization does. Everybody comes to the table to make decisions that knit our region together, and that's what we're here for. Our Parks and Nature Department, where I live, we do a lot of different things as well, but one of the big things, for example, giving out a lot of grants, but we have over 17,000 acres of parks and natural areas, and that has been paid for through 3 bond measures that you, the public, has voted in for Metro to buy these lands and take care of them on your behalf and provide public access to some or all of them. And so that's what we're about. I've worked at Metro for 23 years. I still love who I work for. All right. I just put this slide to remind myself, at Metro, everything we do has an equity lens on it. These were our Metro's equity focus areas. This is just to remind me, you don't need to worry about this slide, but, and there are lots of other good equity mapping products out there, but the point is that's a key driving mission for Metro. There we go. Excuse me. So we're not starting from scratch. There is a Portland-Vancouver Regional Conservation Strategy. It's available online, www.regionalconservationstrategy.org. I'm going to share this presentation so y'all can have the links that I've got in here after the fact if you want them. So it's watershed based. It's centered on Portland-Vancouver region there in the middle, but it's watershed based because we need to know what we want to connect to and from, and because watersheds are a really good unit, ecological unit to work with of various sizes, as we were discussing earlier. So what you're looking at here is the land cover and the habitat mapping that we did in 2012 for this effort. And at that time, we knew that we didn't have oak information. Oregon white oak here, Quercus garryana, is a very at-risk species, and the species that rely on it have declined in tandem. And so we didn't have oak and we didn't have wildlife corridors. And so we formed 2 work groups, the Oak Prairie Work Group and the Regional Habitat Connectivity Work Group, to help do these things. We'll talk a little bit more about those. Working on that mouse issue. Hold on. There we go. We also have a statewide Oregon conservation strategy. In fact, the meeting I was just in had Rachel Wheat, who is ODFW's, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife's habitat connectivity person. They have a whole position for that, which is awesome. And there's an Oregon conservation strategy. A couple years ago, it went through an update. And we tie into that. But what happens is when people map habitat and they're looking at other areas, they tend to just put gray over the urban areas. And that's not right. We have a lot of habitat here. And plus critters have to be able to get around here. And, you know, it's about a 500 square mile area. So people have to be able to get around, wildlife have to be able to get around, and that's where we run into trouble. I just wanted to start off showing you a couple of slides just for fun, because this is context. This is Clackamas Community College, right? Is this the Environmental Learning Center right here? Not sure. Anyway, it's up on this end somewhere. And so this is it. And this is LiDAR. This is laser beams shooting down to see how tall things are. And what you can see here is how much water shapes our landform. Here is the Abernethy Creek system. Here's the Beaver Creek system. And look at these canyons, right? There's an interesting thing that happens in these streams out on this side of town, and that is they start up in these flat areas, unlike most streams that start up in the mountains. And then they drain through, you know, development, and so they get dirty. And then they come down through these canyons where they're getting better land cover adjacent, and groundwater's coming in and feeding into the stream, and the water quality just tends to get better and better as you go downstream, which is opposite the normal pattern, which I find very interesting. So the red thing is that first urban growth boundary in the country that I mentioned. So that's our first slide, and we're going to see two more like this. This is the 1950s land cover. We didn't have an urban growth boundary then. That came in the 70s. Here's Newell Creek Canyon Park. And as you can see, this area has already been heavily influenced by agriculture, even in the 50s. You can see a lot of, see the forest is limited, whereas it used to be mostly forested. And there's a lot of agricultural land cover, which can be hard for wildlife to cross. And I want you to look especially at this stream. This is a tributary to Abernethy Creek, and see it comes down here, right? It comes here, right? Down there across watersheds to the Beaver Creek watershed. And while most of our habitat connectivity actually lies along stream because they're linear features, and Metro, actually, when I got hired in 2005, we were working on regulatory protection, 2001, sorry, for streams and wetlands, and those got put in place. So we have streams that have buffers around them now. And that's a good thing because they also service wildlife corridors. But the kinds of things we tend to neglect are these interwatershed connections. And so now this is a land cover in the 50s, and I'm going to show you it today on the next slide. Right? One of the things you can see from this is urban growth boundaries work. And that causes a conundrum because Metro wears a lot of different hats. We do transportation work. Transportation infrastructure is some of the worst wildlife barriers, right? And we ask for high density housing to hold the line on the urban growth boundary, but then it becomes harder and harder to have a lot of green in your urban area. And so we have to be really strategic about it, and especially if we want to keep our biological diversity here. So keep thinking about this. If you want to go out and be an advocate for your area, start working on this wildlife corridor right here, right there. Now, I'm going to tell you how these models were made briefly, but this is the top third of our regional habitat connectivity work groups, habitat connectivity models. And I just wanted to show you that it's actually picking up most of this corridor through here, which is nice. I'm glad the models worked because I saw it in there too. And so we'll be talking about that a little bit more too. But the important thing is there is still almost connectivity through here. So a few little tweaks and we'd have a great corridor. All right, I've been working at this for a long time. 2007, I started really getting interested in wildlife corridors and habitat connectivity. And I laid at that time, we didn't have a lot of things like PowerPoints and such. And I laid a great big piece of vellum, which is see-through paper, basically, on top of a big aerial photo, and just drew these out, the biggest habitat patches we had around and the best connections from them, and between each other and to areas outside of our region. But it was a very crude basic map, and I liked it, but we didn't really use it for much because it wasn't very science-based. We didn't have anything then. So we looked at it for our planning, but that's kind of all we used it for. So we need to get more scientific. In 2008, we published this Wildlife Crossings Guidebook. I've put links at the end of our talk for this. And in 2010, I did a literature review on wildlife corridors and habitat permeability, which means what it sounds like, how permeable is your habitat for an animal to move around in. So why do we care about habitat connectivity? One of the biggest single reasons is, say you have two habitat patches, right? And they're not connected and they're isolated. Think Mount Tabor. So here they are, and there's nothing connecting these two, right? And say you have two habitat patches down here, and they're connected, even by street trees. These ones have more birds. I've seen 3 studies like this in both in the US and elsewhere. So even street trees can provide habitat connectivity. But the key thing is the species richness. There's more species in these habitats where they're connected. And that's because if a species blinks out accidentally, which they do, then there's no way for them to repopulate that habitat patch. And so that's one of the reasons we need habitat corridors. Animals also need to disperse from their breeding grounds. They need to migrate, a lot of them, not all of them. And then this also maintains genetic, the animal populations don't get inbred if they're not isolated. And also, habitat corridors and connectivity are really one of the most important things you can do if you want to help wildlife under the threat of climate change, because we don't know which animals are going to need to move. We don't know where they're going to need to move or exactly what's going to happen with the habitat. And so the best thing we can do for them is protect the nice habitat patches that are already intact, restore them, and then keep your connectivity and work on getting it better where it's not good, because it's just really going to be critical in the future for these animals to be able to survive. All right, this is from USDA. I've got to dig back through one of my earlier talks because I failed to get an acknowledgement on here, but you can get on their website and find this, and it's they allow anybody to use it. And this is just saying, actually, there's two theories that go with this. One is island biogeography, which says, and this was a real study, E. Wilson, way back in the day. He studied islands and he found that if they're bigger, they have more species. If a little island out here is closest to it, it has more species. And so that's the theory of island biogeography. Bigger patches are better. That's very simplified, but that's the idea. When you get on land, that basically translates to something called metapopulation theory, which is how wildlife populations move back and forth or don't. So you got a big patch here. Some of you have probably read or heard about edge effects. That's like around a small habitat patch. You have a lot of invasive species, including plants, birds, and other animals. There's not much room in the middle that's not edge habitat. In fact, about a 30-acre patch starts to be where you start to see wildlife that like bigger patches. And not all of them, just like the first of them that need big patches. So if you have a 100-acre patch here, it's 20%, 27% edge. And the animals that are area sensitive, now those are the animals that need big habitat areas to make their living, they can live in here or larger patches depending on the species. So it's different for every species. But so bigger patches are better. And when I wrote that literature review on habitat connectivity, I did look into this. This is hectares right here. And this is just clusters of species who need larger and larger and larger habitat patches. So it's kind of interesting. And my own thesis data published in 2001 bore this out. You need more than one corridor network if you can. And the biggest reason is that, like, first, things can interrupt a corridor by happenstance. Somebody builds a home there that we didn't have it protected, etc. So if you have one corridor, the other issue is that animals can't always find the entrance to the corridor. So say you're a turtle, right? And you're walking around over here and you're going, let me find my cursor here. You're walking around over here and you're going, you know, I really need to get out of my parents' territory because we're getting crowded in here. And then you can't find the corridor entrance to find another habitat patch if you're slow. So that's one of the reasons more corridors are better. And it's just a better opportunity. So multiple corridors, and then look at these things, these little guys here. Let's see if I have a slide on that. Yep, I do. Hold on. We'll look at that in a sec. Now, here's something important. Wildlife corridors and habitat connectivity, how well they work depends on the matrix that they're embedded in. And so you've got your habitat patches, you've got your connectivity areas, and then everything else is the matrix. So you may have urban, you may have agriculture, you may have wildlands. In our case, it's pretty darned urban. And different types of matrices can be more hostile to wildlife, and urban is pretty hostile. It's a little easier for wildlife to get across a farm field, although it still isn't that easy, than it is to get across a development or a big road. This is what I was talking about with the little patches. These are stepping stone patches, and they only work for certain animals, especially birds and invertebrates, but they do work if they're set up correctly. We'll talk about that. These are stepping stones, and you have to think about where the gaps are in your stepping stones and how to fill those in so that it's viable enough with the research that you have in hand for wildlife to get across here, at least part of them. There are a lot of barriers to wildlife movement. I mean, a big one is, the two big ones really are transportation infrastructure and development. Agriculture can also be a big barrier. It just depends on the situation. But when you get down, I showed you wildlife corridor model, but when you get down on the ground, what looks like a corridor on the map may not be at all because it's got a complete blockage. It's got a bridge they're never going to replace that wildlife can't get under. It's got a culvert that lets fish through, so they fixed it last year, but they didn't fix it for wildlife. Fences can be big barriers for animals. So these are all wildlife movement barriers potentially. Also poor habitat quality. Animals are less willing to move through an area if the habitat quality is, these are generalizations, but if the habitat quality is poor. And the hostile matrix, the urban matrix, for example. If your corridors are too narrow, some animals will not use them. And then you have those edge effects too. I will say a narrow corridor, I can't find anything in the research that really convincingly says narrow corridors through an urban area are bad. There's some research that says, oh, predators get in there and so forth. But the bottom line is all the research is supporting that even narrow corridors help. They don't do the whole thing, but they help. And then another thing is if your vegetation gaps are too wide, those stepping stone patches, you were seeing. And another big thing is human disturbance. One of the other things I'm working on right now is how to, well, I just submitted a paper called Using Wildlife Fright Distances to Inform Trail Planning. So if I'm me and you're a deer, how close will you let me get before you run away? That's a wildlife fright distance. So you can use those, collect them up and use them for planning your trails to minimize disturbance to wildlife. Okay, from my career, here's what I think is true. And there are generalizations and nobody may back me up on this, but there's actually quite a bit of research that says a lot of birds don't like to cross vegetation gaps greater than 50 meters. There's interesting research in Europe that shows that birds will preferentially fly over a large freeway along a vegetated corridor on an overpass. They really need visually that vegetation. Wider is better. You get more species. 100 meters wide, if it's decent habitat, works for a lot of species, maybe all of them, maybe not. We're not trying probably to get a lot of bear here in the urban area, so maybe 100 meters is good enough for a lot of species. There are out in the wildlands, there are larger animals and carnivores that need bigger than that. What's the minimum? Like I said, even street trees can help, but about 30 meters wide, 90 feet or so. If you can get that, it's better than nothing. And again, street rows, there's actually quite a few hedgerow studies out there. It's interesting. Okay. All right, now it's time for the quiz.
Okay, I'll pull that up for you right now. So. Can everybody see that?
Sure can.
Okay, great.
So go ahead and vote.
And there are 3 questions. So if you scroll down, you'll see all of them.
There you go. Grand Theft Auto. Let me know, Michelle, when you think we're done with this.
Sure. So currently we have almost 100%. Let's see.
Impressive.
91% participation so far. Great
Good
job,
one.
everyone. Let's see. For the 3rd question, we're up to 90%. So well done, everyone. I think we're close.
All
So
right.
you can address those now, Lori. Thanks.
Okay, these were really meant to be funny. The gap, I just like the word. And it is true that some animals definitely would have trouble getting through a large gap store. Maybe the River Jordan too, but mostly it's that 50-meter gap. For the 2nd question, what is the matrix called, right? The matrix. I had to look up what you young folks are using and liking for video games. I only knew of the matrix. And of course, why are they important? It's mainly to maintain biological diversity in those habitat patches that you've got around you. Okay, we ready to proceed onward? That was fun. So now I'm going to tell you, I won't get too technical, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the technical work and the collaborative work that we've been doing in the region to work on wildlife corridors and habitat connectivity.
Perfect. And Lori, as you get
Yes.
into this section, just know that
Yes.
there's about 10 minutes left. I thought it might be a good time to let you know.
Great,
that.
that's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right, so there's a regional habitat connectivity work group. I founded it in 2016. I was already working with PSU on trying to put together the preliminary information to do some modeling on GIS in 2014. So we formed in 2016. We've got 45 or 50 member organizations. We're just finishing up some equity work. We had a strategic action plan. It didn't have enough. It really wasn't considering equity because it was written by a bunch of science folks before we were really thinking too hard about that. So we backtracked and did that. Here's our mission. And like Metro, equity is an overlay on everything this work group wants to do. So this is connectivity assessment on an actionable scale. What does that mean? It means we need it specific enough in the urban region that we can actually tell if it works or not. So we need to be able to tell policymakers, transportation planners, and so forth, whether this will or work, whether an animal can get through there or not, etc. We're not the only ones doing wildlife connectivity mapping. So is Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. They finished up their work. They actually borrowed our modeling methods early on, and then they leapfrogged over us, and they actually have a product out for you. Now you can get up on their website. It's pretty cool. But there are differences in modeling. They had 50-some species. This is what their models look like. Here's Clackamas Community College in here, right? This is what their model looks like. And I wanted to compare the two, see how they did here. This was actually the first time I've compared these. And there we go. A, it captured the major patterns. B, we really need that detailed habitat data for the urban region. Now, there's 2 corridors that need to be worked on. We set up 8 surrogate species. We did a lot of research behind it, everybody else's research. And then we set up basic habitat types, forest, wetlands and open water, and oak. And then we found the 8 surrogate species, 2 or 3 for each habitat type that represent the needs of a lot of other animals. And we did computer modeling for both habitat patches for those species and for core connectors, individual to each species. And then you can look at them differently, or you can put them all together. And we also have field methods to look at habitat quality and barriers. We cut it up into about 500 by 500 meter pieces and go out and look at the habitat quality. And then if you want to look at individual species, there's both modeling and other ways of thinking about it with these scorecards. That's just our species. Recent applications, I mentioned the bond measures. The latest is 2019 Natural Areas Bond Measure. Before we floated that bond measure, we looked at connectivity data to figure out what was important, what wasn't, and what patches were connected. After the bond passed, we had to do a lot of work to get down to the nitty-gritty details, and we used it then too. And most recently, we've got a transportation committee from the RCWG, the Habitat Connectivity Work Group, and they've been advising me, and I have been putting dots on the map where I think there could be issues with the several hundred new transportation projects that are coming up in the Regional Transportation Plan. And Metro runs this process. Everybody comes to the table, but Metro runs it. One of the things we did is collect roadkill data. That's what this is. We did not, apparently Multnomah County doesn't keep roadkill data, so we got ODOT, Clackamas, and Washington County, and those what you see there. And they're very informative. They can't tell you everything, but they're helpful. When I was looking at the Regional Transportation Plan, these are the dots I put on the map. So I'd work along a wildlife corridor, it hit a transportation project. Is that going to be problematic or not? And those are those dots, and they're prioritized into 3 tiers. We'll be submitting this soon to our transportation planning folks. What can you do to help? All right. There are, I mean, it's like climate change. Like, it's really easy to feel like your individual actions don't matter, but that is not true. You actually can do help. What happens at the local scale adds up to the bigger scale. So when you go out in the future and you get your jobs, or if you're in a job now, start thinking about it, talking about it, and considering habitat connectivity, because if you don't have a connected patch, it's really degraded. Inform people about it, advocate for it. I can't do that. I'm a scientist for an agency, but you can. I love the Backyard Habitat Program, and I look at it as a really important way where we can't acquire lands to just feather the edges of wildlife corridors so that urban matrix is not so hostile. And get your backyard certified. I haven't done mine yet. I need to get to it. Also, I'm almost done with these. Shrubs are bird food powerhouses. In the spring, almost all birds need to use invertebrates to feed their young, but the shrubs, trees do too, but shrubs really put out all this food. And what I'm asking you to do is think when you plant stuff, try for natives, and think seasonally on food sources for animals. There's a bloom time chart, so you can think about that. These are some of my favorites. It's an ugly slide, but at least you'll have this list when I'm done here. Spring, summer, fall, winter. And if I can just give a piece of advice, native roses have gotten really invasive in my yard, and so does native blackberry. Sword fern is excellent. Not a shrub, but excellent. A lot of dark-eyed juncos nest under them. Bracken fern is deciduous fern that hosts tons of bugs. We need dead leaves on the ground because that's what the sparrows and the thrushes need. They kick through it and they get bugs. And then we need cover. Think evergreens in the winter, because if you have a lot of deciduous trees, you may not get a lot of birds in the winter. And dead wood is good. Do wood piles, do snags, do logs on the ground, do everything you can to get, and also leaves and dead wood build your soil. Should I feed the birds? Yeah, sure, why not? There's been a little bit of research that says maybe some migratory shifts towards suburbs that have a lot of feeders. That was in Europe, but you know, I feed birds. Try not to feed the non-native squirrels and rats. If you don't live in a large oak patch, your squirrels are non-native unless it's a Douglas squirrel. Eastern gray and fox squirrels. And hummingbirds, feeders, yep, but keep them, if you're going to tempt them with those, keep them filled in the winter so the annas can eat. And you can see my face, black oil sunflower, millet for sunflower and millet for your sparrows that do on the ground. And suet is very fun. You can get a lot of good birds that way. Want my job? Go out and get your master's degree. Despite some talk I've heard lately that you only need a bachelor's, in my field right now, not true. Go get your master's. It's only a couple of years. Get real experience, volunteer, associate yourself with some organization that does work along your lines. Make yourself useful. I came and volunteered some of my early data for Metro to help them figure out if they had a good habitat model or not. And then come and network at the Urban Ecology Symposium on March 11th. It's going to be at Reed College. It's, I think, our 23rd or 4th annual. It's a lot of fun, and it's really one day fast-powered thing. So think about joining that. And that is my presentation. And I'm not sure whether we have time for questions, Michelle.
We do.
Yeah, I'll let Alexis take over. I think she's been fielding some questions in the chat. So yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah, we've had 2 questions come through already, and or I see a third one that's asking about a link that was shared on one of the slides. We'll make sure that links are shared out, and Lori, if you're okay with it, a copy of the slides as well.
Absolutely, no problem.
Perfect. Yeah, so Claire, that'll get you that link. If I'm remembering, that might have been the one for the Bloom calendar, which is a really fun resource.
Gotcha.
One of the things that you mentioned towards the beginning that I wanted to revisit is, or not towards the beginning, but midway through, you talked about surrogate species. Can
Oh,
you
yeah.
tell us what a surrogate species is?
Thank you. I failed to say that. I was trying to hurry a little bit. So
I know how
surrogate
that goes.
species, in our use, those 8 species that we model habitat for, we selected those not too common, not too rare habitat specialists that need one of our 3 habitat types. And we modeled habitat for them. Surrogate species are meant to represent the needs of a lot of other animals of their ilk. So for example, the red-legged frog is a pond breeding amphibian that also needs upland forest in their life cycle. And so that represents a lot of other pond breeding amphibians, and it's also ways to knit together our different habitat types.
And so with a surrogate species, you're looking at one specific animal's habitat needs, knowing that it can cover many.
Right. We hope so anyway. It's
Right.
never perfect. The land cover data is 10 years old now. We will have made mistakes, but it's better than what we had. And the ODFW's work has like 54 species, although that's not really that many for statewide. The truth is, if you lean back and squint at a map, you can see where the remaining connectivity is. And you just need to think about things like oak, corridor width, things like that. It's very visible. What's left is what's left. So when you see models like ODFW models, they're showing the same patterns.
Thank you so much. Someone was asking, are there specific strategies or habitat elements that are needed specifically to enhance connectivity given our hotter and drier summers and colder winters? Like for instance, is there greater need for water sources in summer along wildlife corridors? And this person is asking kind of specifically in mind of how private, urban, and suburban lots can help.
Okay.
Something more specific to changing climate.
Okay, let me think about that for a minute. Would you restate that question for me, please?
Yes. There's kind of 2, they're a little connected. So are there specific strategies or habitat elements that are needed specifically to enhance connectivity given hotter, drier summers and colder winters?
Gotcha, thank you. And the answer is yes, but we haven't got there yet. And the water sources is an interesting question. I mean, one of the reasons a lot of animals travel along streams is everybody needs water, right? Would I go put a water tank in that connection between Abernethy Creek and help me out here, what's the other stream? Blanking. But anyway, the other stream system, Beaver Creek, thank you. I don't know. I'm not sure what they need. That's the honest truth. People think we know where all the wildlife is, and we don't. We know what kinds of things live here, but we don't have surveys for everything. We just don't. So we have to do the best we can with the information we have on hand and then improve it as you go down the road.
Well, thank you.
And I would be looking at seasonality. If I was doing restoration, I would definitely be looking at seasonality in what I plant there.
Thank you. You said something, you ended your previous sentence and go down that road, which I was going to use as a segue. So speaking of roads, someone was looking at an open space along Highway 217 when you were showing certain maps and kind of saying that area looks like it's going to be planted with native oaks and pines.
Yeah.
And can anything be done to that regard? I don't know if you wanted to scroll back to that slide or just answer the question outright.
Let's see if I can find that.
And for folks sending more questions in, I am seeing them. I'm trying to give a little thumbs up response for
want
each.
the early
And
slide.
while Lori scrolls
here we
back
go.
there. Oh, perfect. So just so you all know, we'll send an evaluation link for all of you guys for feedback for next week. So next week, we're going to be talking all about the wild bees of Oregon. But hopefully you all can hang on the next couple of minutes through Q&A. Okay, Lori.
The question about oak was?
Someone was observing that open space along Highway
yeah.
217 looks like it could use being planted, and they were curious what might be done in that regard.
That's where we need the watershed councils and the members of the RICWIG to get together and figure out what the heck we're gonna do and what our priorities are, and we haven't gotten there yet. There's a lot of local priorities that wouldn't rise to the level of regional priorities that are equally important. And so actually that meeting that we had this morning, just half an hour, I kind of jumped between meetings. We were talking about these very issues. We have this data, how do we get it out to people? What are the uses? How do we get it to policymakers? And those are the kinds of things we're discussing right now. And so that level of detail is important, and I can tell you we're not there yet.
Yeah, I would add to that from a watershed council perspective, having kind of, worked with different private landowners. It would come down to who owns which
Right.
parcel of land we're looking at and what their capacity and motivations and incentives or concerns are about planting those areas.
Absolutely. Yep. That's why I love the backyard habitat program, right? It's a great way to add habitat to an area.
Yeah, it is great. So another road related question, this time
Yes.
related to roadkill.
Okay.
Where can and should people report roadkill?
We don't have a mechanism that I know of for that. Okay, yes, we do. In that the data that we got were people who go out and collect roadkill data that work for the transportation organizations or work for the Humane Society, depending on which county you are. They go out and they pick up the roadkill when somebody calls it in, and they record it. What that means is you get the big stuff, the wildlife vehicle collision stuff. It doesn't pick up any of the little stuff, the lizards, the snakes. I saw a ton of dead baby snakes one time out in Gresham that just like they must have emerged at right the wrong time and they were just all run over. Did that answer that question? Are we there?
I think so, Laurie. I think maybe Alexis is multitasking, fielding questions. So I just also wanted to add, if you do have to leave early, I have put a little evaluation link in the chat, and that really helps us with looking at topics for the future. So not wishing to interrupt the flow of the questions, but
No problem. All right. What's the next question?
Okay, Alexis, are you there? What happened to Alexis?
I think she's frozen, actually. And
She's
she just
frozen.
I can see that Cassie Ruths, I'm not sure if I've pronounced that right, with Marion SWCD, thanks for coming, has their hand raised.
Okay, go ahead. Yes, do ask away.
Awesome. Thank you, Lori. I enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
My name is Cassie. I'm the Urban Conservation Planner for Marion Soil and Water Conservation District. And just a couple months ago, we actually just launched a new program very similar to the Backyard Habitat Program,
Nice.
but one that's available to Marion County residents. And I was wondering if you would be willing to talk with me sometime to offer your perspective on which priority areas in Marion County outreach would be the most productive on.
Sure. My
Awesome.
email is on the last slide. Well, the next to
Awesome.
last slide, since we have a book ended by Clackamas Community College's slides.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
If you have put a question in the chat and we haven't addressed it, please feel free just to unmute yourself and ask away, ask your question.
Yes, Doug, do you have a question? No?
Hi, Doug.
He flipped up on my screen, so I thought he had a question. Let's see. Looking for other questions. Oh, still wants to report roadkill. You know what? Contact me. Let's get a program going. We need this. We really need this. We need roadkill knowledge and we need it for the smaller critters. So come talk to me. Let's try to get something going. We need a grad student to do this for us to get it going. Yep.
Okay, how would I contact you?
My email is on the second to the last slide. Lori.Hennings@OregonMetro.gov.
Thank you.
And also for those of you left, we will be sending out, the recording link and also any other resources that Lori or Amy have from this talk to share with you, so you can follow up on some of these areas of interest. So we'll be sending that out in the next few days. So let me just see if we have any more questions. Please, if you have a question, speak up now. Otherwise, I think we're almost ready to finish. So any questions, anyone?
Really appreciate y'all coming. I see 2 questions suddenly. Doug. You're on mute. There you go.
Are you available to speak to individual watershed councils?
Yes, if I can squeeze it in my schedule.
Okay, thank you.
You
I'm with
bet.
the Greater Oregon City Watershed Council.
I love that watershed council. That's so urban. I love it. Allison?
I live in, well, near one of those crossing areas that listed as high importance. Is there anything people in those areas should be doing as far as coordinating with y'all to help?
You know, anyone is welcome to join the RCWG, the Regional Habitat Connectivity Work Group. So you can contact me if you want to get in on the fun. You can also work with, you know, it's always great to work with partners to get this kind of work done. You can, let me unshare my screen here. It's hard to see. Okay. Sorry, I lost where I was. I apologize. I have long COVID. My brain gets a little tired at the end of my talks. So I lost that question. Allison, can you ask me again, please?
Oh, it's about working with y'all to yeah.
Thanks. Come on board, Allison. Come to our meetings. We have quarterly meetings. Just email me and I'll get you on the work group list. You can also work with your local watershed council. They get a lot of restoration done. They write grants. Metro has lots of grants. You kind of have to, if you're not doing your own backyard, you kind of have to find the right people to team up with. And usually at the local level, it's either the Soil and Water Conservation District or the Watershed Council.
Thank you.
You bet. Here's somebody that says, I wanted to take a screenshot of the plant list. Let me reshare my screen if I can remember how to do that.
It looks like Doug has another question, Lori.
Hold on
whilst you're-
just a moment, Doug, and we'll get
Oh,
it
no.
to you.
My apology.
Oh, just didn't put your hand down? Let me get rid of the chat there so I can see. There's 2 slides. Here's number 1. I'll leave it there for a minute. And here's slide 2. And this isn't, you know, an exhaustive list. Watch out though, because some native nurseries sell plants that they say are native that actually are like up in the mountains in Oregon and that kind of thing. So these are all things that grow here.
And Lori, there was one more question that came through in the chat from a little bit earlier. It asked if there's any good examples of hedgerows being used, native hedgerows being used in urban areas or suburban areas locally.
That's a great question. Out on Sauvie Island, Metro owns a property and I'll be honest, I'm blanking on the name because my brain is tired, but I'll think of it in a moment. And we actually have a hedgerow out there that we manage for pollinators. And the soil and water conservation districts seem to be heavily involved with pollinators, and there's several good guides out on that. So I'd be looking there.
Awesome.
Nothing else in the chat. Thank you, folks.
Yeah, hey Lori, it's Alexis. I'm back. I really apologize. My internet utterly crashed.
That's no problem.
And
It happens.
It's terrible timing though. So I wasn't sure if someone had asked before I hopped off if there was a link to read more about the Metro Regional Transportation Plan advisement that you've been working on.
Okay, hold on a second. I'm going to send myself an email so I remember to do that.
I can write that down and send it to you.
Write that down for me and I will definitely do that. There is an online link. It's got a nice map. You can click on the dots and get it explained.
Wonderful. So for those of you that are still tuning in and curious about links for follow-ups, one of the things that Michelle and Amy and Lori and I will do is connect via email after today. And I'll list out all of the links that we were planning on sending, and then we'll get those extra couple that just came up during the conversation today as well.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, folks. So we'll get that evaluation link in chat one more time. And next week, we're going to be hearing from one of the foremost bee experts in the state about all of our wild bees here in Oregon. And if you don't know how many species there are, you're in for quite a jaw-dropping announcement of numbers.
Thank you all very much for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next week for that Bee Talk with Anthony. So thank you, Amy and Lori. Lovely to see you in person. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Did you need me to stay on?
I think we're good. I think we're good, Laurie. Thank you
No.
so much.
You bet. Do you know how many people came?
122. at the moment.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry about the questions. My brain just gets tired.
That's okay. We appreciate you coming.
Yeah,
Thank you
betcha.
so much. All
It's
right.
better than it was 3 years ago.
Okay. And we'll
All
connect
right.
on email. All right. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone. Take
Talk to
care.
you soon. Bye-bye.